Welcome back to another episode of Beekeeping Buddies. I'm Steven.
And I'm Luke.
Well, it's end of March. We're starting to get busy in the bee yards.
Yes. This is actually kind of my favorite part of the year because by now you know what bees have died. You know what hives are gone.
Yeah.
That didn't make it. And there's always hives that don't make it. And we're kind of getting geared up for all of the season to come.
Well, it's also when we're making plans about, now you're getting excited. You're coming out of winter and you're going to have all these goals and you haven't been sweating in the bee yard for hours on end yet. You're still excited about it. I agree. This is one of the better times of the year for beekeeping.
Forgotten what it is to sweat in the bee yard.
I know, right? So what have you been doing out and around the yard?
I'm still treating. I got all my hives treated with oxalic acid. I went back and you and I had that conversation about, I think the Canadian Beekeeper threw up a thing on, hey, what was the winter losses like?
So you sent me a video on Canadian Beekeeper talking about the video where they were talking about the winter losses associated with the commercial guys doing pollination. Yeah. And there was a follow-up by Canadian Beekeeper talking about some of that.
Yeah.
And in that follow-up number 1 video, he was concerned about thinking about his mite scheduling. And he's like, I need to spend some more time thinking about how this mite scheduling and what it actually means for mite treatments and mite buildups. And so he's like, I'm going to spend some more time on that. And so then he disappears for a couple days, and 3 or 4 days later, it's a pretty short period of time for him. He posts another video, so follow-up to the follow-up, where he goes into in-depth playing with Randy Oliver's Mite calculator, which is a spreadsheet that he's developed, and it allows anybody, it's open, available to play with, to go in there and pick times of year and apply an efficacy, how effective is a treatment, because any given treatment isn't 100%. And so you can make some assumptions starting in January. This is what I've got, we'll call it 15 mites in the hive. And then as time goes on, there's an understood growth rate of those mites based on the evolutions of brood cycles. And that's all factored into the spreadsheet. And so you can put in different treatments at different times with different effectivities, and that you can actually see the progress of how many mites. Like the sheet gives you a running total of the number of mites that it feels that you have in your colony. And so by looking at that, he paints some probable explanations of, hey, if you have this versus this conditions, and you should just go watch the video because I'm not going to get it all right from memory. But the takeaway, the nugget here for the podcast is he was really going to focus on making sure he had done a good job with some early spring treatments in order to really nail down the mite counts early in the spring, because he felt that was probably the best indication of long-term success for his mite counts versus later season treatments. And I can't really properly articulate all of the reasoning behind that. He does it again when you watch the video with the way he's able to manipulate the spreadsheet. It lays it out pretty concisely, and it's pretty easy to follow, so it's worth a watch. But I showed that to you because I don't think you had run across it. Right. And I believe your immediate response was, well, I guess I'm going to go out and make some more treatments.
Yeah, that was my immediate response. Because even with a 25% efficacy treatment, which, so oxalic acid is about a 95% treatment for the mites that are on the outside of bees. We call them phoretic mites, but there's some pushback on that because phoretic means it doesn't harm the bee, and there's phoretic creatures that transfer on animals that don't harm the host animal. And anyway, because of that, I was like, well, if say that mites, which usually live on the underside of cappings, right, inside the cells. If say we had a 25% rate of effectivity on that, then I mean that's kind of the thing that I'd be going for, at least with early oxalic acid treatment. I probably will also do the sponges made at home this year.
Yeah.
Because while those don't knock down mite numbers, they keep them low, and that's something that I think will, if hand in hand with the information that was shared there, I think if we can just keep the mite numbers low throughout the season, then we'll have a much more successful winter. I had a really successful winter overall, personally, right? We talked about, I think I lost 9 hives in my main apiary. I've lost 2 others outside in all of the checks I've done. There's probably another 2 that I've lost, and in the checks I've done, I've checked another 25 hives. So my survival rate this winter has been pretty good.
You think weather mites?
I don't know. I was really strict. I had a sidekick last year. Sidekick, if I want to call him a sidekick. I don't know. I had
you were calling him your intern.
He's my intern, but Ben, and he probably doesn't listen to the podcast anymore. But Ben was my intern last year, and because I had him, and he was very happy to do the oxalic acid treatments. He thought it was pretty cool. And so I taught him how to do it. And so he was like on the ball on it. He was really, really on, like, used the correct amounts, really, really checked things. Timing was correct. And I think as a result, I think my mite counts were low. We did it early on, right? We had everything done by August 12th. And going into winter, I had to feed a lot for a lot of them. But outside of that, going into winter, it was pretty strong.
Speaking of feed, you feeding right now? I put some 1-to-1 on mine.
Yeah.
I dug up some internal frame feeders. I put them down below, mostly because all of my lower high bodies aren't being used, and I didn't want to. Like, I pulled a couple outside frames, and they're basically just to see what they had for store still left for honey,
right.
And they still had outside, like 1 and 10 were still had honey on them. So I was unmotivated to pull those out of the hive to make room for a frame feeder. So instead I just went down below. I kept my box orientation the same, but I just put the feeder down below.
And for those confused by the 1 and 10, right? It's the outside frames in the box. There's 10 frames, right? 1 on the left, 10 on the right.
I usually go left to right like a book, but yeah.
So, and usually standing behind the hive. One's on the left on the back of the hive, and
I mean, it doesn't really matter, right?
It doesn't really matter. That's where they
it's
store
just
the
a
honey.
way to talk about the frames, right? Like 1 is always on one side, 10's always on the other, and 5, 4, 5, 6 are in the middle, right?
Right.
So,
and by the time it's warmer this time of year, they're using up that honey and or moving it and or ignoring it in some of my hives. So some of my hives actually are 100% bringing maple pollen in.
So I had a lot of foragers. I mean, work, on our nice sunny 60-degree days we've had. The front of the hives have been super busy bringing in light grays and light yellow pollens. I did put the pollen sub on because we are still. We had 32 last night. We've had some days of rainy and overcast where nobody's going to be flying. So I think giving them an opportunity to have a pollen source that isn't something that's coming in all the time is a benefit.
Yeah.
I think you said you were open feeding?
I'm open feeding pollen. I have pollen also on top of hives because if they can't get out, because we've had windy and rainy and cold.
I mean, it's just Midwest spring though.
Yeah, we've had Midwest spring. But it's just more. It's windier than it's been.
It's classic. We had last week ago, not yesterday Sunday, but a week ago we had an inch of snow on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And were you over here on a Monday or Tuesday when it was 73?
It was the next day.
It was Monday. It was sunny and 73, and we were working a fence line for the goats.
Yeah.
And just puts it in perspective in terms of the weather shifts that we can have here in the Midwest. And if you're a Midwest listener, you know exactly what you're talking about.
Yep.
But and it's really hard to communicate how rough the springs are for Midwest beekeepers because of these wild swings in weather we have, and how difficult that you get a hive trying to raise brood. and they get excited because we've had a week of warm weather, and you start getting some grass pop up, and they start kicking into high gear. Our days start getting longer.
Yeah, and they got to cover that brood too, right?
Yeah, and you don't have population. You get some chilled brood, right?
So they are bringing in the question that I actually had. I'm going to jump to questions early, but the question I had was, so the maples are blooming and we're bringing pollen in. Do maples produce nectar? And from what I see in my hives, I pulled a couple of frames on the real strong ones. They're bringing in nectar. So it has to be maples.
You think it's maples, or you think it's something early like daffodils?
I haven't seen many daffodils up. I've seen them peeking, but I haven't seen flowers.
I don't have a lot in my yard, period, but I can't say I've seen a lot.
So it's got to be willows and maples, and the maples produce some nectar, so it's got to be what they're pulling in.
Because you haven't put any one-to-one out?
I haven't put any one-to-one out, no. Now, I have fondant on top, and the other interesting thing that I'm finding this year is that I have some hives that have a ton of honey left that survived, and some hives that have had nothing. They were just starving.
Yeah.
And so those I put a lot of fondant on, like a pound of fondant on, which is a lot of fondant when you're making it, at least for your wrists. And so for those, I'm putting a lot of fondant on, but it's a really interesting stark contrast between the two. Of I got a lot of honey left, or no, I don't have anything left. So
if you're asking yourself, you live in the Midwest, how deep into the hives are we getting? I have yet to pull any brood frames. I pulled an outside frame to see what honey I had left. I split my boxes, my double boxes, in half to pull empties out of the bottom to put my fume freighters in. I still have not opened up the center port of my hives yet because I felt like I still had enough 30 and 40 degree nights that I just didn't want to risk screwing with the core brood nest.
Yeah, so I didn't pull out of the middle. I pulled maybe 3 frames in, which is still right on the outside of that brood nest. And also, will they'll store some stuff if they've got the middle filled. So I didn't get into the middle. I mean, I probably could, especially if I time it right and the temperature's right. But I don't much like doing that. So I didn't do that.
So between now and the next time we're casting, it's probably going to be April. Are you going to be doing reversals, or are you just going to leave everybody where they are and let them do their own thing?
So it depends on the hive. I'll crack the lids and see what they're doing down below. The main reason I do reversals, if I do reversals, is one, that they're easy to get to. If they're easy to get to, then it's fine. And two, I like to rotate about 10% of my frames out.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to rotate them out, I'm going to rotate the bottom side out.
The empty ones on the bottom are
super easy.
Yep.
Yeah.
But will you take that opportunity then to take the top box, move it to the bottom, take the bottom box, pull the frames out, and then put your empty frames on top? So you're essentially doing a reversal at that point.
I'm essentially doing a reversal at that point. However, I need to be clear. I don't do this on all my hives. I don't.
Yeah.
Like if they're still down below, and there's quite a bit down below, I'm gonna let them move and adjust things as the season goes. They tend to. I have found that when the queen runs out of room, they'll tend to push her back down, especially as they bring in more nectar. They tend to push her back down.
And so, if in the past we've had notes where we've had first dandelions last second, third week of March, I don't think we're having it this year.
No.
We haven't seen any. It's still been, like I said, we had 32 last night.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be a first week in March, so we're still probably a week off based on long-term forecasts for weather. So, are you how motivated are you to get into your honey supers and see what the state of those are and stuff like that? Are you still putting that off, or is that an activity you're working on?
So the honey supers I'll be putting on. So the strong hives that are down in both boxes, I'll be putting honey supers on early to see if I can't capture some of that flow.
Yeah, some
black locust.
Black locust.
Yeah, black locust or early dandelion, or we're still a ways out for apples and cherries. So some of those things, I'll throw some supers on, but mostly I need to wait for those. I kind of crowd my hives a little bit more than they probably should be. It probably hurts my honey flow too.
Early spring though, making sure that they always build quick if they're crowded. It's just it's always hard to teach that point to someone new because they aren't always, a lot of the new beginners aren't in their hives as frequently as you're going to be doing this full time. So, you have the opportunity to sort of more closely manage than maybe your average hobbyist.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that brings up teaching, right? It's a good point. I haven't seen drones yet, right? And so
I haven't either.
The major question that we get is, when can I split? And that always starts for me is when I can see drones.
Yep.
Purple eye drones. And again, if we haven't been into the hives, we haven't seen that comb, so we don't know if there's drones, usually on the bottom of those comb.
So I think our weather has pushed us later than it was certainly last year. So
yeah, last year was like 2 weeks early.
Yeah.
I think we're largely on time this year,
Correct.
which is a little strange.
Speaking of other timely items, we were watching some YouTube meetings that were broadcast on YouTube. So these aren't videos that our listeners can go back and watch, unfortunately. But we'll try to sum up some nuggets that we pulled out of them. One of them was on the Michigan Beekeeping Club talking about some feral bees. There was a guy from Purdue, help me out with a name.
Dylan Riles.
And he did a presentation on. He was doing research on this, right?
Yeah, this is part of his PhD, I believe.
PhD, and so he was looking at taking samples. People can send him samples of bees collected from various locations. It could be a managed hive. It could be a package. It could be a swarm. It could be a swarm capture from the woods. And he tries to classify these when you send them in, whether they're from sort of a swarm capture from a wooded area, which they were sort of defined as feral, or from your just installed package in your apiary of 50 or 60 hives in an urban setting, which they considered to be a managed colony, managed sort of yard setting. And so what they do is they look at the genetic breakdown. They genetically process the bees and look at the markers on the bees. And it turns out, and most of the presentation delves deep into an understanding of these markers. And it turns out that because of the long history of the honeybee, there are regional differences from Northern Europe, from the Central Europe, Italy area, and those two major, because remember...
In Africa, right?
In Africa. Remember that North America, the reason why I'm not talking about North America is because they're all imported here, right? So all of our stock come from European areas.
Yeah, about 200 years ago is when they first... We just passed the 200-year mark.
Yeah.
So that they've been in here for a while.
So genetically, they can identify sort of the classic Russian style, which is the Northern Europe, the Italian style, which is the Southern Europe and Italy, the Carnelians. They can genetically identify those. There's some sort of subspecies associated with the Southern Mediterranean region, sort of North Africa, in the Middle East, and then obviously your Africanized versions.
Yeah, and they did a breakdown both of genes and the mitochondrial DNA. So mitochondrial DNA is inherited from the mother only.
Yeah.
So you can see the mother's side, and then they compared that to the gene markers on them too.
Yeah, he goes into a lot of detail on what some of the specific differences are between mitochondrial DNA and sort of trait DNA. It turns out mitochondrial DNA is very old. It's very slow to change, and you can get general species information from that, but you cannot get behavioral traits like VHS from mitochondrial analysis.
Right.
And so they're looking at two things: where's your bee from, but also some behavioral markers that they seem to have sort of thought that they have identified for certain traits. And the sort of sum it all up was, hey, are we seeing breeding? he goes into a considerable portion of the talk talking about what it means when you breed a queen with a drone and how those genes mix, and from that you can actually trace lineage. And he's got a slide with all these dots on the screen, and it turns out that with genetic testing you can actually trace history of a given bee back a considerable way, I guess, through
and the other interesting
cataloging they've done.
He seemed to have populations as well,
yeah,
right? And they break out into populations in the U.S. regionally, which was pretty interesting to me because it suggests a lack of movement of honeybees.
Because you could assume one of his theses was typically your spread of traits was limited to what your drone congregation area was. So that's as far as a given area you could change, and so your ability for those traits to move long distances took long periods of time because your drone congregational areas were, single mile radiuses. So talking about moving 1,000 miles takes a long, long, long time versus modern beekeeping techniques that allows us to ship vast quantities of bees all across our country where, those are not kept perfectly enclosed. And so some come out or you bring in packages, right? The point is you get these pockets of different, what am I looking for? There were the base types, right? The Africanized, the Italians,
Carnioles.
Yeah.
So you get pockets of wow, what's the word for it? Not racial.
It's not. It's almost like species. A subspecies. I forget the term he was using, but the point is, his data, it sort of identified hot spots, in Indiana that seemed to correspond to some of the larger beekeepers in that areas.
Yeah, and he's based out of Purdue.
Yeah,
so he's Purdue University is where his research is being done by.
I happen to note that there appeared to be only 3 samples for Illinois, all of the state of Illinois.
Yeah.
So sort of some salt has to be sprinkled onto the results in terms of how much you're going to infer for our entire state, a population breakdown based on 3 samples, which doesn't seem to be statistically relevant for the state of Illinois, given how many colonies we have. But that's sort of an aside. That boil it all down, there seems to be no significant difference in the way bees work in our hives between inbred, highly managed hives and feral colony hives.
Well, the important part about it was that as a beekeeper, I've always worried about the amount of inbreeding in my hives. And his point was it was not significant.
Yes.
Inbreeding, not significant, not an issue. So my main takeaway from the whole talk was, although it was very interesting, the applicable part was there's not a lot of inbreeding going on.
Or the fact that your queen quality is going to have more to do with how many she mates with versus the origin of the drones she mates with. In other words, if all of the drones were brotherly drones or uncles or brothers closely related to her, would have less impact on the health and vitality of that hive versus the fact that she was just poorly mated in the first place.
Right.
Which sort of, it's one of those things where we're always focused on how well did she mate versus who she mated with.
Drone quality has something to do with that too, but he really didn't go into drone quality. And for those of wondering, how many she mates with, and you skipped our podcast on how queen biology works. Remember, she stores all of the sperm from those bees in her spermatheca. So this is a long-term. She doesn't go back out and mate.
Right.
She
it's
runs
just
back
one
out
time.
Sperm.
Right.
It's just Well, it's about 3 times that she leaves, but like one period in her life that she does all of her mating.
The second one that we looked at was a neat talk on the cost of queens. It was another in-depth breakdown, sort of looking at total what raising queens would cost you in terms of, not in terms of time, because he was like, hey, we all value our time differently, and the amount of time it would take to train a paid individual to do this is not applicable. So almost everybody who grafts is doing it themselves. So the cost associated with paying somebody isn't really factored into this.
Well, the speaker for this too, he's, Trevor Bawden is his name.
And he really focused a lot of time on talking about, hey, if you take any given hive, you can do basically one of three things. You can raise honey off of it, you can make splits off of it, or you can do what you need to do to raise queens off of it. And that has a lot to do with sort of like making splits, but it has more to do with robbing brood for brood builders and things like that. And so he assumes that given any given colony, you're going to do one of the three things with it. And so if I use it for making queens and grafting, I can't get honey off of it. And so a lot of his financial analysis at the end was sort of, if I've taken a colony and I've dedicated it to queen rearing instead of honey, I give up all of the profit from my honey. And I feel like it sort of skewed the numbers a lot in terms of the backyard beekeeper.
Yeah. Well, so something else that I was told that I think rings true, and he doesn't say it in there, but he hints at it, is that oftentimes beekeepers, especially smaller than 100 hives, can raise bees for honey, or they can raise bees for bees.
Yeah.
So his point was you can raise bees for honey, or you can raise bees for bees. The larger you get past 10, the easier it is to borrow from hives to make some stuff.
The takeaway from that, I found sort of his end slide of, hey, you can, if you want to do these many queens, you're going to wind up $2,500 in the hole. If you want to raise, 10 times more queens, you break even. Sort of, he had that laid out nicely. I didn't find that all too much of value for me. What I really found valuable was along the way, he talked about some lessons of grafting that really reinforced some of the things that we struggle to communicate in trying to teach grafting. And it sort of really reinforced the idea that we are, in fact, teaching the right things. And that, real quickly, those are your grafting losses between the little tiny larva that you're picking up and putting in a cell, so the grafting action, to a mated queen that's successfully laying is a really low percentage. And he worked with the St. Louis Beekeeper Club.
You have a high loss percentage.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a very low success rate.
Success rate, yes.
And so he worked with the St. Louis beekeeping community to do a long-term, year-long sample with many different beekeepers. And I think the overall success rate, if I remember the number, was only like 42%. From start to end,
which matches pretty closely with what we found.
Yes,
especially in the first couple tries we've done this, where we didn't screw up, or I didn't screw up something big like, oops, I put a queen in our cell builder.
He also talked about the trials and tribulations associated with, are you able to build a cell builder adequately? And the answer with a lot of the hobbyists from St. Louis was no. That they had to, in fact, pool their resources, pool their brood frames, in order to pull enough brood together to build a viable, successful cell builder that could successfully maintain 30 or 40 grafts, which sounds like a lot of grafts, but you got to remember, I think it's 25 cells per bar.
Yeah, about 25 cells per bar.
About 25 cells per bar, and there's 3 bars to a frame. Yeah. So your average, if you just drop one frame of cells into a cell builder, that's 75 potential queen cells. So grafts, 75 grafts. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but it sounds like a lot. But the reality is, it's only one frame, and we've struggled with that ourselves. I know we've struggled in your apiary to pull enough. We actually limited the number of cells we ended up grafting because we didn't feel like we could go through all of the hives that you had available at the time, which was probably 25 or 30 hives, and pull enough brood to build a strong enough cell builder to support more than like 20 cells.
Yeah.
And the other issue was the infrastructure to support, can you support 40 or 45 hatching queens all at the same time, right? Like you need 40, that if you hatch 40 queens, it means you need 40 mating nukes. You just can't leave them wandering around for days.
And because they kill each other, right? And then the mating nukes are, I found that polymer nukes is probably my favorite way to go.
Right.
Or I also have one that's a modified 3-frame mating nuke.
Yeah, mating castle.
Queen castle. Those are my two favorite things to do, right? Because then it's only 3 frames or 4 frames. We've played with the little tiny castles.
Mating nukes, yeah.
Mating nukes. And
I guess they're mini mating nukes, little styrofoam dudes.
Yeah, they're about, they're tiny. And those I really struggled with. I never got those to work well. And it's probably just lack of experience, right, in doing that.
But with last spring we built, 5 queen castles for you?
We built 5. We have 2, 3, 4, 4, I think. 4 queen castles.
4 queen castles. So that's only 12.
Yeah.
And you throw in 4 or 5 more 5 frames. So, the reality is, even out of your apiary, which is a considerable size up from your average hobbyist, still can only support about 20 developed cells, which if we're going to, depending on how we're doing that day, we might actually graft 40, hoping to get 20.
Right. Well, that's something else that he does talk about is, 40% success rate. And I think people overestimate how well that's going to go.
Yeah.
Right. It's just not going to go
because
super well.
We've certainly had failure rates of more than 50% just between our ability to move the larva into the cup.
Yeah.
Right. And you move the larva to the cup, and then you check to determine whether or not they've cleaned the cup or they're actually starting to draw a cell about 3 or 4 days later.
Right.
And we've seen in that time period that they're only drawing 4 cups out of 15.
Yeah.
Right. And that's because we personally did a poor job of moving larvae, and that's a touch and feel thing.
Yeah.
And that's an experience thing.
Yeah. And you have to, the other thing that we kind of talk about, but not really, is that you need to really be feeding those. So they have to be fed well as that queen's developing, so that there's a lot of royal jelly in there, so that she has a better chance of survival. If you're not doing that, you're not going to have high quality queens. It just doesn't work.
So the takeaway was there's a lot of trials and tribulations in actual grafting. We say that at the same time, we still continue to try to do it in our apiaries on a limited basis, and we will be giving a class for the Peoria area this coming May. If you want to attend, reach out. We haven't put together a cost for that. Supplies will be provided, or the Easy Beezy cells and some grafting tools will be included in the cost of the class, so that you can take those home and immediately apply the learnt skills to try to graft a couple of queens in your apiary. It's a hand-on event. It'll be an all-day event. We will be actually going through and building, showing you what it takes to build a cell builder. We'll actually go through the hives and pull frames of brood and put that together.
Well, I'll probably have a cell builder already put together. I'll have at least one put together beforehand, because we're going to be grafting that day.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be grafting that day, you need to have a cell builder on hand.
And this is sort of an extension of the old IQI, Illinois Queen Initiative, which was a group that was floating around that got a lot of traction pre-COVID, and then during COVID it sort of dropped off, and it struggled to sort of gain traction again, and I think we're trying to bring some traction back to that. I don't know if we're going to be the official relaunch of IQI or if we're IQI adjacent. But
we're probably IQI adjacent at this point. I'll also be doing, ideally before that time, I have some UBO spray. So 4 overwintered hives I have some friends out here that I know have some over 100 hives too. So I'd like to be going through, and you can spray that on there and use that. And I'd like to go through and do tests.
Do some assays?
Yeah, and we'll do some assays to see what kind of specific hygiene we have out there. So maybe we can pull some really high-quality genes off of when we do our grafting. And we'll be, sharing some tricks and tips as well during this process. So I think it'll be a good class. It's something that I'm also studying as far as I'm taking the Master Beekeeper course out of University of Montana. So that was this week's thing was also on grafting. So there's some little tricks in there, like placing the grafted cells face down right after you graft on a wet paper towel to keep the humidity levels up. So humidity here in Illinois usually, right, is like 90 degrees during the summer, or 90 degrees with 90% humidity, right? So you're breathing water. But they like to be about 75 degrees. They don't like direct sunlight. There's a whole bunch of little things that we'll cover.
I noticed that the last commercial video I watched of a commercial operation grafting, they kept their frame draped with a moist towel.
Yeah.
Almost the entire time. Like, they'd flip it up, they'd graft a half a dozen grafts,
yep,
or a dozen grafts, whatever a row was,
yeah,
and then they'd flip that towel back down while they were resetting their bar of Easy Beasy cells.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Now, they also might be grafting in areas where they don't have to suck water in all day when they walk outside. So that may be a thing, but.
So I think, did we have some questions that came in this week for our Honeybee Hotline?
For the Honeybee Hotline, I've had a few questions. I have a couple people that are interested. We have a cutout that we're going to do, and the guy that we're doing the cutout for, he is taking a class. Yeah, so I do a class, River Road Apiary. It's a 4 sessions over an 8-week period where you do that. So he's had some beginner, real basic questions. What kind of equipment do I wear? What kind of equipment do I need? Beginner questions like that, but nothing that I think we haven't already covered on this podcast as far as that's concerned. I've had some questions. There's some early interest already in wax, so that's an interesting one that I don't really know how to price my wax. That's like a product in the hive that I just don't have a good feel for how to do that, right? Like Amazon, you can buy a pound of wax.
Yep.
And it's, I don't remember.
$10 a pound? I don't know.
$10
the
a
last
pound.
time I looked, it was $10 a pound, but price probably has gone up since then.
Yeah. But then do you sell wax? Like
I do. I had, my last wax sale was before Christmas.
Yeah.
And I think I sold for $10 a pound, and I made it clear that I had a couple of different quote-unquote grades. Sure. I had stuff that I had processed much more that was poured into little bars. It was all nice and pretty. And then I had a block that was straight off of my my solar wax melter that doesn't have nearly the processing steps in it. And I said, I kind of have both of these for sale. I said, they're going to be slightly different amounts. I'm like, kind of depends on what you plant. Like, some people just want to add that to some candles, and other people are going to refine that several more times based on what they're doing with it.
Sure.
Or not. If you're blacksmith, you probably don't care.
Blacksmith, woodworking, they don't seem to care much.
They don't care much.
No.
So I kind of sort of give it a little, sort of handshake on the level of processing I've done at that point. But I think roughly it was $10 a pound when I sold it. I think I only sold probably about a pound, maybe 2 pounds at the time.
Interesting. Yeah, a couple other questions that I got were things like, hey, right, we already covered it. Can I graft? When can I graft? And so the answer to that one is still going to be not until you see drones. Usually purple-eyed drones is what you're looking for. And if you don't ever seen a purple-eyed drone, if you see a drone cell in your hive, you can pry one open. It will kill the drone, but you can look in there. There's a little bullet-looking cells. you can look in there, and if the eyes of that drone are purple, it's a purple-eyed drone. And by the time that it is hatched and ready to mate, you can be grafting and have queens ready for that.
Yeah, the time it takes to raise your queen cell, the 16 days, plus the time it takes her to develop, mature, go on mating flights, come back. By the time she's ready to go on a mating flight, those drones will be also emerged and had time to develop, and will be also interested in going out to a drone congregation area. Last but not least, probably droning on what we'll be doing over the next couple of weeks. We talked about it sort of start to end, a start of the podcast concerning some of our upcoming activities. I think I'm going to try to put together some hives. We have our upcoming nuke delivery. That'll be middle of April sometime.
Yep. Just got a note from the people putting those together. They went through 20 of them. They look really good, they said.
Good.
So that's good news for everyone. Those are certified before we get them, and then we'll have them rechecked by our local inspector.
And I think I'm going to put together a trailer of some hives to take down to. We had a guy come into the club and talk about aerial broadcasting clovers into his summer corn, mainly for pollinator habitat. He initially thought he might get some soil boost on that, but turns out he's just mostly doing it for pollinator habitat. So he's going to have a couple of 3 weeks of blooming clover here coming up in May. So I told him that I would try to bring some bees down and try to grab some blooming clover.
Yeah, I think he only has 1 or 2 hives.
Yeah.
So he's really doing this for all the rest of the pollinators in the area that come through that are looking for.
But we're not talking a small area. I think he said he was aerial broadcasting over 300 acres, 300-acre fields or something.
I don't remember. It was a large amount, enough that I stopped and I was like, oh, that's a lot.
Like I could come down and park like 5 or 10 hives on a trailer in the middle of his field.
Yeah.
And probably get a decent benefit on those hives out of that clover bloom.
Right.
So I'm interested to try that. It's also sort of a concept of a small pollination rig for hire. Mm-hmm. Instead of having a complex truck that drives around and drops off hives, the idea is I just keep 10 to 15 hives on a trailer and just drive a trailer to a location, drop it off, and maybe put an air tag on it so it doesn't disappear on me. And
yeah, are you going to put
a month later when they
on the hives themselves? You're going to put it on the trailer.
On the trailer. I don't think they're going to take the hives off of the trailer because they'll probably be tied down.
Yeah, they'd have to be a actual beekeeper to actually do that too.
The idea that you could drive up and hitch up to the trailer in the middle of the night and drive off, I think is much more concern. But either way, a way to track that and make sure that it's not.
Doesn't walk away.
My bees aren't flying away.
Fly away. Grow wings and fly away.
But the idea is that it would make it easier to drive that around from a melon field to a melon field or whatever, and apple orchard to apple orchard in the spring and melon field in the summer.
Sure.
We're in the pumpkin capital of the U.S. here in Central Illinois.
Yeah, the pumpkins will make you worry just because they don't produce any nectar. They're all pollen.
Yeah,
so
but you're going to have the hives anyway.
Yeah,
it's still a better pollen source than sitting here in my yard.
That's true. I'll be continuing to do my Master Beekeeper course. So I'm about halfway through it right now. I'm passing
year 2.
Of year 2.
Yeah. Year 2 of 3.
Yeah, I tested out of year 1. It wasn't that bad to test out of. Year 2 is much more in depth on the honeybee physiology and some of the things that they do and the diseases and things like that. I will say that this kind of course is not for most hobbyists, right? Like, this is not something that you're going to take and is it going to help you be a better beekeeper? Not really.
some of the biological information we were talking about before the podcast was certainly fascinating for people that are into bees and really want to know some details about some finer processes. But having that knowledge isn't going to impact how you keep bees.
Yeah, you're not going to go, right? You still need to go out and check them. You still need to go out to work them. You still need to go take mite checks.
But how they clean their antennae of pollen is not going to change.
Yeah.
Knowing that information or not knowing that information doesn't change the way you beekeep.
Yeah, exactly. Now, and it's not terribly cheap. I think this class was $350 or something like that. Testing out was $60. I think the next class for the master portion of it is like $430 or something like that. So they're not. It's quite a bit of money to spend on something like this. So many of you are probably thinking, "Oh, why are you doing this then?" And mostly it's because I want to be able to see what's there, and I am into bees, right? And I want to know, like.
But you're also making the step from hobbyist to sideliner too, so
sure,
and it's a good feather to have in the cap in terms of with your interaction with the beekeeping community, to be able to get on TV and tell the reporter that you're a master beekeeper and you come out to my apiary and talk about bees for a news segment. That's always a good talking point.
Not that I'm going to make people call me master. Maybe my family master
beekeeper,
but not. It's not something that I'm going to be like, oh yeah, you must call me this. But it is an interesting course. A lot of it's it's 99% online. There's a lot of forums. There are some video presentations that you get to go through and look at, and those are all on YouTube. Interestingly enough, I don't know if they're just unlisted or if they require that you have a link. I think they're just unlisted. So. They are interesting in that manner. The tests are still tests. I've sucked at tests my whole life. I always have. I still the tests are probably my worst. I've gotten A's on the last two tests. However, they're low A's, and they're probably my worst part of the whole thing. But the forums on there are pretty interesting, and people have some really interesting thoughts and questions. So it was good to know too, because a lot of what we've covered in our podcast is supported by what people are saying and in the forums and supported by what the teachers are teaching. There's some interesting in-depth analysis of eczema, so maybe we'll do a podcast on eczema, which is kind of a infection of the gut.
Yeah, I feel like, every podcast we're talking about mites and diseases and
I know.
AFB and EFB.
Well,
when are we going to talk about the good stuff,
We're going to talk about the good stuff. We're going to talk about, how to extract honey better.
How many pounds of honey we're getting? How many splits we've made?
Yeah.
How many queen cells we've got? Oh, wait, maybe that's not a great thing.
Yeah.
How many queen cells we have in our graft as opposed to...
how many? We got a swarm capture counter, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, we're gonna have a.
Maybe.
I don't think
I got 20 last year though.
I wasn't anywhere close. I had 3.
I got 20, and I only caught one of my own.
But I think you were. Are you the contact person for the club now?
I am. I'm not.
Are you though?
Now I am.
I was gonna say.
Now I am.
Oh, see, I'm losing this deal for sure.
Last year I was not. But yeah, now I am. Yeah.
He's not gonna give me any of the phone calls.
But we do have cutouts. We got 3 cutouts set up, so we'll time lapse those at least, and show people what that's like. Throw a video up. We did a time lapse last time. So
and I'm back to a full-time AP manager for the club's hives, and so I'll be reporting on those as well as my own. So
yeah,
I'll have two different apiaries to talk about, because I don't know that I work the two the same.
Did you pick up somebody to mentor this year?
I think somebody approached me at the club. I don't know that I have reached out to them since then or if they contacted me, but I think somebody at the last meeting was talking to me. They lived out my way and were looking for a mentor, so it doesn't surprise. I'll probably still get phone calls.
I've got one that I picked up in Dunlap, and I need to reach out to her. And then I've got
that's our Hives for Heroes.
Yeah, contact.
Yeah.
And then I'm in the process of hiring a helper for this year. So he's
another intern.
Yep. 16, so that I might have them for a couple of years instead of just one.
Or you might have them for 2 months.
Or I might have
or two visits.
First sting.
First sting. I'm out.
I'm out. But he seems to be real positive about it, so I'm kind of excited about that. We'll see how that goes.
All right. I think that'll wrap it up for this week. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of Beekeeping Buddies.